Good morning, Alex.
Morning, John.
Excellent. Thank you very much for joining CTO News Thursday's vlog. We look forward to hearing more about you and your role as National Sales Manager at E.ON Installation Services. And we also look forward to learning more about your take on the UK social housing sector, specifically around retrofitting and a fabric first approach. So without further ado, let's jump straight into it.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. So in the first instance, can we just learn a bit about you? So how long have you been at E.ON and what is E.ON?
Okay, so I've been in the energy sector for about 15 years. I've been with E.ON for just over 7 years. E.ON has evolved a lot over that time. It's a pan-European energy company, an energy solutions-based business now. They have been at the forefront of evolving energy markets for quite some time now. They've been leading a personal energy transition, providing smart, sustainable and personalized solutions for customers at home, but as well as for your business and also across across cities alike as well.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing. Sounds like E.ON has been evolving and whether it be sort of moving with the times in terms of its innovation.
Yeah, I think over the past few years, predominantly they were over a decade ago were a producer of energy, but as times have changed, they've morphed into the area of energy solutions. So it's more about providing customers the ability to reduce their energy consumption by implementing carbon reduction and energy efficiency measures.
Excellent. Okay. So with that being said then, what challenges are you seeing within the UK social housing sector?
Okay, so the housing sector is a very innovative space at the moment. There's an awful lot going on. I've been in the energy sector a long time, and this is one of the areas where there is a real hive of activity. And I think that's been brought about by some quite strong and ambitious targets that have been set by the government. So obviously all social housing providers have to get their properties to either a D-rated property by 2025 and by an EPC C-rated property by 2030. Those targets are a little bit more ambitious in Scotland. So there are strong targets, but to accompany that, there are also lots of funding mechanisms and funding streams in place to support that. So the targets are there, the funding streams are there, but then that presents everybody with a need to do everything and the ability to do it. But there are a lot of problems and challenges along the way. Those at the moment are data. I think data has got to be the biggest issue at the moment within the social housing sector. Over the years, housing associations and local authorities have kept records of their property portfolios, but they've not necessarily been kept up to date that well. And as more and more funding streams are coming online, they're requiring more and more detail into the property and more calculations involved in about improving those properties if you want to qualify for the funding stream. So definitely the biggest challenge at the moment is data, and for housing associations, local authorities to be able to collect, manage and store that data in the best way possible. And there are a number of platforms out there that can assist them to do it, but there does need to be a real change in attitude and a drive from the housing associations and the local authorities to want to improve the data sets of their portfolios. So I think that's the number one challenge, is around data. And once the data has been sorted and is in order, building the projects is relatively straightforward. If the data is in place, you can identify what needs to be done, what properties need to be improved, what measures and technologies need to be implemented into that building to bring it up to standard to retrofit it. So I think that side of it is relatively straightforward, and matching the requirements with the various and multiple funding streams that are available is complex, and with the right assistance it can be done, but there's a lot of opportunity there. So I think the real second challenge that lies within the sector is around education. It's about tenant engagement and tenant education. A lot of these technologies that are being introduced or being implemented are new, and some of them are quite complex to get your head around. With the old gas boilers, it was very simple. People turned in, they turned the thermostat up, and the house got warm. It's now a lot more complex than that. And the biggest challenge for the local authorities and the housing associations is to educate those tenants as to what these technologies are, why they should be adopting them, how by adopting them, what behavioral changes are going to be required by the tenants, but really pushing the benefits of them. And once you've got over that piece of the tenant understanding what they're going to have installed, the benefits it's going to give them, and why it's obviously also going to benefit the planet as well, it will give them a much greater desire or acceptance of the need for change. And once that's in place, it should make things a lot easier. We do see a lot of refusals from tenants. They don't want you in the property. They don't want to change things. They like their old gas boilers, and we've even seen tenants out there that have got coal-fired boilers, and they don't want change. So it is very difficult to get them to adopt the new mindset of what's required. But once that's done, hopefully the number of tenant refusals will come down, and then that will allow more and more measures to be installed. But there's also, a large educational piece from E.ON's part as well. Being able to take those customers along that journey and keeping them updated and educated about what's going to be happening, and what disruptions they're going to see over the coming weeks and months. So I think for me, they're the two main hurdles. One is data, and two is tenant engagement and education.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing. And that's fallen in line with obviously government regulation on the tenant voice, or capturing the tenant voice. If you remember, the first time we met was at the Retrofit Challenge Summit. And you had, obviously you were presenting there, and you had a device on your shoulders and in your head, and that captivated the audience because, as you explained, it's a device that you go into a property with to, whether it be take a panoramic, whether it be audit of that environment. And I just wondered whether you'd be able to explain a bit more about that, as well as what is meant by a fabric first approach, and what does retrofit mean to you?
Okay. So that particular device that I took to the show was really to showcase kind of the innovation and the technology that's available out there. And as I answered on the last question, sometimes getting into social housing properties is one of the hardest challenges. Getting in there, carrying out multiple surveys for multiple measures. Previously we would carry out a survey to see if there's been loft or cavity wall insulation. We would then carry out a separate one to see whether the boiler's been fixed or needs upgrading. You'd then need to have a separate one if you wanted to look at putting solar PV on the roof. You would have these multiple visits to a tenant site, and it was disrupting for them. So it's actually technology that's kind of, I think, been accelerated because of COVID. But we started looking at video surveys, and we found that tenants and customers were quite engaged with doing video calls and walking around the house and showing them various different things. So it's just it's an evolution of that. And the headset that I was wearing at the show was a 3D head scanner. So what it allowed surveyors to do would be to go into a property. They would be able to carry out a EPC survey. They would also carry out a retrofit assessment, which is part of the new the PAS qualifications and guidance. But it would basically take a a complete 3D model of the entire property, along with pictures and images as well. And from that, you would be able to take that image back to the office, upload it, or email it across, and we'd be able to send that to the various different technicians within that technology, or within looking at that particular measure. So we would be able to scan and carry out a full survey and assessment of a house within about 30 minutes, but we'd then be able to distribute that to 5 or 6 different specialists in that technology to look at whether solar PV was suitable, whether it was suitable for air source heat pumps, whether the windows and doors needed replacing. So it was a complete all-inclusive survey, and I think that's one of the real advantages that technology is pushing us along those ways and allowing us to do that, and it allows us to look at that whole house retrofit approach, which under the new PAS 2035 guidelines is the new approach as to how houses should be dealt with. Instead of someone coming in and doing one measure and walking away, it's about linking multiple measures together to get the optimum efficiency performance for that building, that property. And by having all of that information available to us from one site, one survey, allows us to link a number of projects or individual smaller projects together to be able to retrofit a whole house, as opposed to very much piecemeal work as how things have been done over the past 10, 15 years. And to answer your question about the Fabric First, the aim is to do the whole house retrofit project. So take a dilapidated, inefficient property and take it to the quality of perhaps a new build or an EPC rating C or above. And the first step of that is to do the fabric before you start looking at replacing heating or various other energy efficiency measures, or installing solar PV. The first thing you need to do is make the fabric of that building efficient. So whether that's loft insulation, cavity wall insulation, or even external wall insulation, and having this headset would be able to allow us to take very accurate measures of each room and the whole dimensions of the house. And we'd be able to measure up and design the external wall insulation that would be applied to that property. And yeah, Fabric First has to be the first approach because it can be the most disruptive. Some of the more complex measures, but also they can be the quickest wins. So putting in loft insulation, might only be £200 or £300, and it can dramatically improve the thermal efficiency of the property. And again, cavity wall insulation is very, very cheap and affordable, and it has a major effect. So the quick wins are there, and if the quick wins have been done, then you can look at the external wall insulation, which is more costly, but ultimately brings the thermal qualities of that building up to a much higher standard, which will in turn require less heating and therefore save the customer the most energy.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing. Great. Okay. So in your opinion, what would you say are the implications of air source heat pumps with regards to the adoption within the UK, and what benefits would that bring to the sector?
Okay. Air source heat pumps, there are a number of challenges. I am one of the biggest heat pump advocates. I think when I presented, I promoted that as a technology. They're 3 to 4 times more efficient than existing heating systems. But the problem is they're not for every property. Over the past 5-10 years, the technology has improved dramatically. But I think the biggest challenge is there's not a single silver bullet solution to the UK's heating problems. And the recent events in Russia have resulted in obviously higher energy prices for gas as well. So there is a lot to bear in mind at the moment. And at the end of the day, we want to deliver clean heat to the social housing sector, but we also need to deliver affordable heat. And those two things don't necessarily marry up if you don't get it right. So at the moment, obviously gas is relatively expensive, but it's a lot cheaper than electric storage heaters, which are clean heat, but it costs you around 28 pence per kilowatt of heat, whereas a gas boiler will provide that to you at about sort of 4p. So there is a huge difference in the technologies out there. An air source heat pump is probably the right solution for about 60 or 70% of the UK's housing stock, but it's not the answer to everyone. And where the issues arise is if you install an air source heat pump into a building which isn't thermally efficient, i.e. the fabric hasn't been done first, then it won't work. It works on a lower temperature, and the idea of an air source heat pump is you switch it on and you leave it on all day, every day, but at a much lower temperature. And it constantly runs in the background and it keeps your building at exactly the same level all day, every day. But the problem is if the building isn't thermally efficient, then all that heat escapes, and then the heat pump's working harder and harder and harder to try and maintain that level of heat, that 19, 20, 21 degrees, whatever your preferred temperature is. So if the fabric of the building hasn't been looked at, then they can end up costing a lot more. And I think that's where a lot of the problems have come in, and a lot of the horror stories that have come in over the last 10 years, which are given or have previously given heat pumps a slightly bad name. And part of the new PAS 2035 legislation and the processes that have been put in place of that are there to ensure that those errors won't be made going forward. But as I say, the biggest problem is making sure the fabric of the building is done first. If it's not, they're not going to work. If it is done, then it's the right solution. The two other problems that you have with air source heat pumps is currently at the moment, the temperature that they run at requires you to replace all the pipework and all the radiators in the house, which can be quite an upheaval for the tenant. It can be quite a disruption, and it can also add cost. And until either technology improves or we can find a more cost affordable method of doing that, it's still relatively expensive to install compared to a gas boiler or electric storage heater. So your initial capital outlay is that little bit higher, but the long-term running costs will be a lot lower. So I think that's where local authorities and housing associations have a bit of a conundrum, is do they put the money up front now to solve the problem for the next 5-10 years, or do they go with a quick fix now and basically push that problem further down the road? And it is something that we see quite a split with in decisions as to how they go about that. Some may not have the money available up front to do these changes. And then I think the third problem is you can't install air source heat pumps in flats at the moment because of the building regulations and the planning consent that's required. You do get a very small amount of noise from an air source heat pump. It's not a lot. It's a lot less than what anyone would think. It's a bit like when you go on holiday and you hear an air conditioning unit running in the background. It's very much like that. So at the moment, in a central sort of London and Birmingham and Manchester flat complexes, it's very difficult to install an air source heat pump. So there are a number of small challenges, but none of them I don't think can be overcome over the coming years.
Excellent. Well, it's great to hear, and it seems as though there's a solution in place to get that fabric first approach with air source heat pumps where it's applicable. So that's great to know. Okay, so we're coming to the end of our CTO News Thursdays vlog, and off topic, what inspires you?
What inspires me? I think I've just read David Attenborough's book, big inspiration for me. Absolutely inspired by the natural world and his passion and drive to not only kind of preserve it, but more educate everybody about it and the reasons that we need to preserve the country. So my biggest drive in the morning is I get up and I look at the carbon footprint in my own house. I have an EV electric vehicle. I've done a lot of energy efficiency measures within my own home, but the effect that I can have on my own footprint, I've done nearly everything I can, but I want to go further. And for me, if I approach a housing association that has 50,000 properties and I can implement large scale project across several thousands of those properties, the carbon footprint that I can, the carbon saving that I can make is astronomical. So that's something that really drives me within this sector, within this role. The technologies are there. It's just getting everybody to adopt the solutions and having the drive and ambition to move forward with those. And I think that kind of constant drive of education, I see David Attenborough and what he does and how he educates everyone. And I think it's just amazing as how determined he is. And that kind of leads me on to why I want to make a bit more of a difference within this sector. And I believe this sector and working for E.ON is it gives me the biggest platform to make the biggest difference I can at the moment within my life. I've got a 2-year-old daughter now, and I don't want her to grow up in the world that could happen if we don't address climate crisis. So yeah, that's what drives and inspires me at the moment.
Excellent. 100% agree with you, Alex, and so does IT Labs as well. So yeah, we're all on the same page there, and it's great to know. Well, thank you very much for your time today. It's been absolutely fascinating learning more about retrofitting, Fabric First, and obviously E.ON and yourself. And we look forward to many more conversations in the future. And we wish you every success as well in your endeavours. So thank you very much, sir.
Yeah.
And we'll be in touch soon.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.